Welcome to the Interlocked Bible Study. We're going to continue the second part of this lesson. and we have left off talking about the law of God, the law that he gave to Israel, a nation, not like we are today, which is a spiritual nation that is scattered all throughout the world, that covers all ethnicities, and God invites his disciples to make more disciples among the ethnic groups, to add people to his church, the ecclesia, and to become part of his program. But this specific law of God was given to a nation, a people group, an ethnicity, a nation with physical promises. For example, God promised land to the people of Israel, geography, a specific government, and how to govern a people group. So God had pulled them out of slavery, and they were in a vacuum now. What kind of laws should we have? Should we follow Egyptian law, or should we develop our own laws from our own ideas? Maybe we should just sit down together as elders of the tribe, and we'll come up with our own laws and our own ideas. And God didn't leave him to that. He said, no, I think I've got this. I'm the one who knows best. I created all things. I know how things work. So God, in his sovereignty and all-knowing, all wise, gave them the laws. He sourced these laws in his own character and nature. They reflected him and his heartbeat. Otherwise, the people of Israel would have incorporated erroneous ideas into their legal system. They would have pulled ideas from how Pharaoh dealt with things. They would have pulled ideas from Canaanite ethnicities, and from these Babylonic concepts, the earthly concepts. They would have pulled it into their people group and governance, and they would have been indistinguishable from other ethnicities from around the region and around the world. How could they have been called the people of God if they were following man-made rules? So God established law for them. God established the best way to deal with things, okay? He knows best. He made man. He knows how to take care of man. I'll go back one more slide from last time we met, and these laws of God cover every area of life and every aspect. You see it affecting the relationship with God, idolatry, blasphemy, the temple and priests, the worship system, taking vows, swearing, if you will, ritual purity, donations and finances, the economical system, how to war and not to war, how to take care of family, dietary laws and agriculture, incest and other forbidden relationships. So you see that the law of God, all 613 of them recorded, covered every aspect of life, demonstrating that God knows intimately every aspect of the human nature and human life, and is able to provide the best solution for that. And so God was also conscientious of that time frame as well. So you will notice as we go through the law of God and some of the aspects of it, you'll notice that some of the things are very foreign to us. They're foreign because today, in the year 2000s, we are facing a complete different reality. Technology has advanced, globalism has advanced. There's certain things that we deal with and that they did not deal with in that time frame. So you'll notice that certain things have changed over time, and that God's law for Israel was applicable to their situation specifically and to that time. However, regardless of how some things seem inapplicable or even foreign to us today, it doesn't change the fact that God's heart comes through. Okay, so it's God who is immutable and unchanging and is timeless. He's eternal, and his heart and passion and zeal does not change. So as we go through these laws and just see some examples, we're going to see God's heart. We're going to see his character. We're going to see his nature and how it was made practical in that context. So one of the things, here's one of the examples that we see from that time frame and from the law is that God indeed cares for his creation. These are the things that were created, not just man who is created in his image with a heart and soul and mind that was created after the image of God, his soulishness. God, although he did not create trees, animals with soulishness and after his image, and with a spirit, he did not create them with that. He still cares for them. He cares deeply about trees and plants and animals. And you're going to see in the law of God how that was reflected. And so, for example, he directed the Israelite people to guarantee the well-being of animals and not to overwork them and to give them sufficient rest. Let's read Exodus 20, verse 8 to 10. Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest. Chill out, relax, rest. Don't do anything strenuous. Get your mind refocused. Dedicate to the Lord your God, or dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. This includes you, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, your livestock. Livestock are the animals, the oxen, the donkeys, etc., and any foreigners living among you. So God did not want his people to be mistreating and abusing animals. Having them work 24/7, 7 days a week is not appropriate in God's eyes. So he determined that animals needed to be cared for. Remember that God gave man dominion over the animals to Adam and Eve. He said, take dominion over them. God enabled Adam and Eve to be wise decision makers. They were to inquire of God, how God should I treat the lion? How should I treat the lamb? How should I treat dogs? How should I treat the whales? Adam and Eve were to be instructed by God and communicating with him and talking with him and getting input from him, learning from God and from Yahweh and understanding how to be the best stewards possible. And you see from the fall that things shifted drastically. Dramatic change took place upon the earth and how mankind made their decisions. So we have here in Deuteronomy another reflection of God's heartbeat. As he says in 25 verse 4, you must not muzzle an ox to keep it from eating as it treads out the grain. All right. These animals were given the liberty to take a snack as they worked. So in many cultures, they would get whipped, their mouths hit or muzzles put over their faces so that they could not eat. What would happen if an ox ate a bunch of grain? That's less money in my pocket as an owner. Now instead of getting $10, I'm only getting $9. What a tremendous financial loss for me, I say. But God is saying, no, take some of that and feed the oxen. They deserve the grain and for their hard work, and treat them well. Treat them with respect, with the life that's in them. Don't treat them cruelly. The ethnic group that I grew up with in the country called Paraguay tended to be very cruel to animals, but not all animals. There were certain animals they had a high level of respect for because they believed they were possessed by a human soul, or a soul in general, a powerful spirit. So certain animals were discriminated against, while one was tortured and abused. Another animal was treated with high level of respect. So there was much discrimination between animals in that culture, in which I grew up. So you see that God is saying, no, treat animals well. They are under your care. So we also see that beyond the animals, God had this similar instruction for land, property. Man was not to overwork the land. Exodus 23:10-11 says, "For 6 years you shall sow your land and gather it in its yield, but the 7th year you shall let it rest and lie fallow, that the poor of your people may eat." So poor gives the idea that they may not be landowners and own all of these fruits and plantation that yield fruit each year. And so you see that even the poor people will have plenty to eat in that year. It says, and what they leave, the beast of the field may eat. So even that wild animals can eat of these fruits of the land. Maybe it was olives. Maybe it could have been figs. Perhaps it could have been grapes. So they were to let the land rest for 1 year on the 7th year and let it lie fallow. You shall do likewise with your vineyard and your olive orchard. Okay, so there was nothing to be produced or harvested and sold for profit during that year. Okay, now that is so extremely contradictory to entrepreneurial and business ventures. If you're a businessman, you're going to say to yourself, I will not let anything go to waste. I'm going to find how to make a profit off of all these different income yielding assets that I have, and I'm going to make sure it yields to the maximum potential. I want my money working for me. Have you ever heard that philosophy? My money always needs to be working for me. My land needs to be producing cash flow. So there's this principle that is in business, and businessmen and women and entrepreneurs are always looking to have a passive income that the land be producing. And so God is explaining to mankind, very entrepreneurial people, the Israelites, even to this day, you hear of the Jewish people, how they're very, very business minded. And so he's explaining to them something that will require that they trust him and trust his word. He says it like this in Leviticus 25:20, but you might ask, what will we eat during the 7th year? That's a natural question, since we're not allowed to plant or harvest crops that year. And here's God's word to them: be assured that this is God speaking, I will send my blessing for you. Wow. Okay. So that implies trusting him and taking him at his word in my economics. Okay. So what if I took a salary for 6 years, and on the 7th year, I decided not to take a salary. I trusted God that in the 6th year, he would give plenty. Wow, that would be tough, guys. That would be tough for me to experience. If God specifically said this for me today, I would have to exercise a very high level of trust on God's word. I'd have to really believe him. Let's continue on. So in the 6th year, the land will produce a crop large enough for 3 years. So this is going to be something very supernatural happening because of people's faith in God, taking him at his word. Verse 22, you will plant your fields in the 8th year. You will still be eating from the large crop of the 6th year. In fact, you will still be eating from that large crop when the new crop is harvested in the 9th year. Wow. So if the Israelites take God at his word, if they choose to believe him and walk by faith and trust in God, then the consequences of that is they will see a supernatural blessing like no nation under the face of the earth would experience. This is very, very contrary to how countries around them and other ethnic groups operated and functioned. Can you imagine how the news, the media would cover a story like that of a country that intentionally chose not to harvest anything? Every 6 years, on the 7th year, let an entire year rest. The country rested. That would be mind-boggling. And then to have a supernatural blessing come forth from that there would be nothing that would declare the glory of God more than that would on the medium, social media and the media platforms of today. So God also, in his care for nature, demonstrated that he indeed cares about the vegetation. So in Deuteronomy 20, verse 9, here's a scenario from that context. It says, when you are attacking a town, so you and I, we may not fathom Christians and Christ followers and disciples of the Lord in our church age being heavily engaged in warfare, but people of that time were constantly facing invasions. The country we live in today has a very beefed up defensive system. So we're not seeing that as common today in our lifetime as was seen in that time frame. So, but God incorporated in there that, okay, when you do go to war or when you are attacked, here's some things to take into consideration. It says, and as the war drags on, you must not do the following. You must not cut down the trees with your axes. You may eat the fruit, but do not cut down the trees. Are the trees your enemies that you should attack them? You may only cut down trees that you know are not valuable for food. Use them to make the equipment you need to attack the enemy town until it falls. Guys, don't be wasteful. Don't just go out there and waste the nature. Slash and burn is not appropriate. This is in the context of Israel and in that time frame. But God sets forth, look, care for the vegetation. I made you guys. I put you in charge of this earth. Take care of it. Be responsible. I'm not saying you can't cut down trees at all, he says. Use the ones that are needed for equipment. Use the earthly materials that are available, metals, aloes, etc., for your tools and develop things. Go for it, but use it wisely. Don't just rip through all the trees and cut them down. You're going to regret it. You've probably heard many people warning about global warming and associate that with trees, and there's truth to that. You have Amazon forests that are being slashed and burned. You're reducing the oxygen producing trees of the world. At a mass level, you're going to see ecological changes. Now, I'm not a tree hugger myself in the strictest sense, but I want my heart and my life to reflect God's heart when it comes to caring for nature. So we have to exercise this caution that he's sharing here, that he gave specifically to the people of Israel. Let's continue on. This is a third aspect, that God wants his people to treat each other with consideration and respect, regardless of who they are, or what station they have in life. We have to be some of the most uh, what's that word for? I don't want to say racist, because I'm not talking about racism here. Discriminatory. There that's the word I'm looking for. We must be some of the most discriminatory people of this time frame that we're living in. Although there is much kind of global tolerance, although I see that word, and I see a lot of hypocrisy that's tied into tolerance in that word. But there's a lot of discrimination happening, and treating certain people in a certain station in life with a particular regard, while treating another with a lesser regard. And so God is going to address this in the Jewish people and in his holy people through his law. So he's going to say, don't take advantage of each other. Okay, let's read Exodus 22. Verse 25. If you lend money, all right, this kind of affects all of us, because we all use mediums of exchange. So if you do lend money to any one of my people who are in need, do not charge interest as a money lender would. Oops. Don't charge interest. Okay. Don't take advantage. Don't rip them off. Okay. So we know credit cards today, the tendency with credit cards is not that they charge interest so much as it how much they charge. And you're talking 19 to, in some countries, and I'm not saying the US, I think there's certain laws that were put into place to not be exorbitant, gouging people, but in some countries you're looking at some lenders going up to 50% in interest, and maybe even more. And they gouge people intentionally and place them in a role where it's impossible to get out of debt. And so God is saying, be attentive to this, be attentive to this area and how you're lending money. Don't charge interest as a money lender would. Be mindful of this area. Exodus 22:26 says, if you take your neighbor's cloak as a security for a loan, hey, return it. You must return it before sunset. This cloak may be the only blanket your neighbor has. How can a person sleep without it? If you do not return it and your neighbor cries out to me for help, then I will hear, for I am merciful. And he's insinuating that I'm going to be listening to this person who's cold, he's shivering at night, he's crying out to me, because he set his cloak as a security for a loan that you gave him. So be attentive, watch out for these issues. So these are important to God. God also made loans and debts linked to a 6-year repayment schedule. Now, this is fascinating. When you and I take out home loans, the banks offer us a 15-year loan. They offer us a 20-year loan, sometimes 25, but the most common one are 30-year loans, okay? Amortized debts. 30-year long. Now, God is telling the people of Israel, here's how you guys are going to operate. You're going to operate based on a 6-year repayment schedule. On the 7th year, there's going to be loan forgiveness. Wow. What country in the world do you know has anything similar to this? There are none. There is no earthly kingdom in existence, or has ever existed, that has this system in place as a law, thus setting the Israelites aside as absolutely unique as Yahweh followers, as followers of God, making the nations start asking the why. Why do you guys do things this way? I don't understand. I can't comprehend. It doesn't make sense. Mathematically, you don't do that. That's foolishness. So what is foolish in the eyes of the world, God deemed it as essential for his people Israel to make them famous throughout all the earth, and consequently his name would be renowned throughout all the earth as Yahweh followers. Okay, so in Deuteronomy 15, I'm going to read several verses here, so bear with me. We're gonna notice that these God's heart through this, and he didn't give them impossible rules to follow, but instead wanted the heart, God's heart of generosity expressed within the culture. At the end of every 7th year, you must cancel the debts of everyone who owes you money. This is how it must be done. Everyone must cancel the loans they have made to their fellow Israelites. They must not demand payment from their neighbors or relatives, for the Lord's time of release has arrived. There should be no poor among you, for the Lord your God will greatly bless you in the land he has given you as a special possession. You will receive this blessing if you are to carefully obey all the commands of the Lord your God that I'm giving you today. The Lord your God will bless you as he promised. God is making a major commitment here. You will lend money to many nations, but you will never need to borrow. In other words, the nation as a whole will be extremely wealthy and have a surplus of funds that they in turn will be lending out to other countries. It says, and as a result, it says, you will rule many nations. They will not rule over you, but you're going to rule over them. Verse 7, but if there are any poor Israelites in your towns, when you arrive in the land the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward them. Okay? He's giving them instruction of how to, the heartbeat that the Israelites are to have. Instead, be generous and lend them whatever they need. Do not be mean-spirited and refuse someone a loan because the year for canceling debts is close at hand. Oh my, we're in the 6th year. Debts are going to get canceled on the 7th year. There's no way in the world I'm going to give you a loan this year, because you're not going to be repaying me. God's saying, don't do that. Don't be mean-spirited and refuse someone. For canceling debts is close at hand. For if you refuse to make the loan and the needy person cries out to the Lord, okay, so here there's accountability. There's people with access to God. As they cry out to God, you will be considered guilty of sin. Ouch. Number 10, give generously to the poor. So this is how we are to be. Give generously to the poor, not grudgingly, for the Lord your God will bless you in everything you do. There will always be some in the land who are poor. That is why I'm commanding you to share freely with the poor and with other Israelites in need. Okay, what you're seeing here is that God shows no class privilege or discrimination, and he's teaching his people to be the same. Don't discriminate. These guys are poor, so there's no way I'm going to even get anywhere near them. I want to make a point here, because poverty is an issue in the United States where we're teaching from. It's in the city from which we're teaching from in this Interlocked Bible study, and it is a global problem. Okay, poverty, and we see different extremes of that. Okay, so in our economy today, we have a similar struggle where we see poverty everywhere we go. And so Israel saw those same issues, fellow Israelites. But I want to tell you this, when someone loans money, what is the guarantee that you get that money back, knowing that you're going to have to forgive this debt in 7 years, knowing that if they can't pay it back, you just have to call it even? If you as a loaner know that there are strict laws in place that give the borrower rights and privileges, and they have some of their bases covered, what is going to be in your heart? What are you going to try to guarantee? You're going to try to guarantee that you disciple, you equip, you train, you mentor, you coach, you empower the individual that you are loaning money to become a successful entrepreneur, to learn how to overcome their economical crisis. Why? Because you want them to be successful and to pay you back. You want that money back. You want to be able to be repaid. You can't afford to lose a ton of money. What if you have 100 poor people in your town and 99 come to you for loans? All right. You're going to be very, very invested in their lives, to the point where they're going to have to learn some of the key principles in your life, and key principles that guarantee their character growth, so that they can in turn make proper decisions and overcome poverty, to change their poverty mindset. So what does the law of God teach here? We're reading between the lines, but we're seeing the natural effect of God's law. The natural effect of God's law is pulling everyone out of poverty to where everyone is successful. And that's where God is saying, guys, if you follow my law, you're going to be so wealthy as a nation. You're going to be making loans to foreigners. You're going to own them. You're going to be determining their fates and how they treat one another. You've heard the saying, when the tide rises, so do all the ships. All boats rise with the tide. All right, it's the same concept. This is biblical. This is God teaching the Israelite people through his law. God's law makes perfect sense and is relevant for us today. We're not under the law of God. And then at a later point in this particular lesson, we're going to talk about this. We're not under the law of God, but the principles in the heart of God are reflected and relevant in our life today, as members of the Church of Jesus Christ, and living in this day of grace and age that we're under now, the law of Christ. So, okay, let's continue on. God is not showing privilege or discrimination to the people. For example, killers, people who maybe in self-defense or for whatever reason, they killed someone else. God instigated in the law these cities of refuge, places that they could run to and flee and hide. This is in Deuteronomy 19, verse 2. And they were protected in that city of refuge, so that the relatives, when they seek retaliation, I say when because that was a common practice, revenge, retaliation, there is a way that they can be protected and not killed immediately. And these cities of refuge were available and open to all people, regardless of their economical status. Whether they were poor, whether they were rich, whether they were a prince, or whether they were a pauper. So this is very, very different from the pagan laws of that time. For example, another code of ethics from that time frame is called the Code of Hamurabi. The Code of Hamurabi. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but in this code from that time frame, in that era, it stated that the fines for manslaughter were different depending on who was killed. Who? All right. So if a lower class person was the one that was killed, the fine for manslaughter was lower. If a higher class person, a person of status, was killed, the fines for manslaughter were much higher. The stakes were higher. The Bible does not teach that kind of discrimination. Biblical worldview does not tolerate discrimination. The biblical worldview provides a framework for us to understand how to deal with mankind equally on God's basis, not on any kind of man-made law basis. Some man-made laws reflect God's heart, some don't. And we have the ability and wisdom through God's word to determine which laws indeed reflect his heart and which don't. We can do that here in the United States as we face law changes, which laws indeed reflect God's heart, which ones do not, okay? Let's look at servants, for example. When God talked about the feasts and the celebrations in Israel and how they were to take place, he included all of the servants. They were in equal status before God, okay? So in worship, there is no greater or lesser. In Deuteronomy 12:12, it says, you must celebrate there in the presence of the Lord your God with your sons and daughters and all of your servants. It's the same as the day of rest. All of the servants were to rest as well. All of the animals were to rest as well. Okay, so God is showing that he has no partiality between man's status and symbolism as to who they say they are, but he sees man in the same way. Let's look at how God viewed women. He views women with dignity. And this is kind of a strange passage to pick out to prove God's demonstration of dignity, but you're going to see God's heart again coming to this specific law that was laid out in Deuteronomy. So let's read it. Suppose, okay, so this is setting up a hypothetical situation. Suppose you, Jewish people, Israelite, you go out to war against your enemies, and the Lord your God hands them over to you. So you have victory, and you take some of them as captives. Okay, that was a common practice of the time. And suppose, this is hypothetical again, you see among the captives a beautiful woman. Okay, so this is talking to guys, right? Guys, listen to this. This is directed at men here specifically. So you see a beautiful woman and you are attracted to her. You're like, woohoo, man, is she gorgeous? You know, you're saying among the foreign captives, right? You're attracted to her, and you, in your mind, you're like, I want to marry her. I really, really want her as my wife. This is hypothetical again. If this happens, if it shouldn't, but if it happens, you may take her to your home, where she must shave her head, cut her nails, and change the clothes she was wearing when she was captured. She will stay in your home where but let her mourn for her father and mother for a full month. Then you will marry her. So there's a wedding of sorts taking place here. You'll marry her, and there's formality there, and you will be her husband. Okay. So they're, in God's eyes, these two are one, and she shall be your wife. Okay, this is how God is seen. If you go through with this is how I view it. But again, this is hypothetical. If you marry her and she does not please you, that means marital problems, right? There's something that causes problems in the marriage. You must let her go free. Free. Okay, not a slave, free. You must not sell her or treat her as a slave, for you have humiliated her. All right, now again, as I mentioned earlier, some of these laws, wow, where it's hard for us to relate. You and I, as people from this country in which we live in, the United States, from which I'm recording this, and our particular culture that we're in and our realities, We don't typically go to war with our enemies and take captives and then marry the women of that country. That's not a common practice, although in the time frame of Vietnam, there were some elements of that, okay? But today it's a bit foreign for us. So God says, all right, if you're going to do this, if your stubborn heart is going to go through with this, guys, and I know how guys are, I'm the one that created them. If you're so bullheaded and you're going to go through with this, you're going to have to follow these rules. Okay? You're going to have to follow these rules that demonstrate the dignity of this woman. Okay? The people of that time frame would see this as very, very different and odd because the pagan nations, when men would go to war and capture women in that time frame, they would rape them. Brutal rape. No more details necessary on that. And then they would abandon them, leave them for dead. After that, these women, if they survived, they would no longer be wanted by other men. They would live in disgrace for the rest of their lives with no ability to support themselves. Even their own families were unlikely to take them back. Talk about horrible results of the brutality and wickedness of man and the brutality of war. And God is saying, look, war happens, men fall in love. Okay, if you're just going to be bullheaded about all this stuff, all right, this is how you're going to you'll have to conduct yourselves with war brides. Follow these very strict laws. So it shows a much compassion as the woman, excuse my voice, but as the woman, as these different things would demonstrate aspects. For example, shaving her head, cutting her nails. It's taking away her beauty. If a guy's, a beautiful hair, a guy is attracted to that. If she shaves her head and the guy still keeps her after that, it must be love. There must be something else to it. So God's setting up a scenario where if after she shaves her head, he still wants her, then there must be something to this. And the next thing is her clothing. Clothing in that time frame, and much to this time frame as well, represents ethnicity, your ethnic identity. So she would symbolically be shedding her ethnicity and no longer be whatever she was before, a Midianite, a Canaanite, an Egyptian, or whatever ethnicity she was. By shedding her clothes and embracing the clothing of her host country, Israel in this case, she is taking on a new identity, and she becomes one with the people of Israel and has all the rights of an Israelite and a Jew. Thirdly, she is allowed to mourn for her parents for an entire month. This is a compassionate act of care for her emotional needs. Do you see God's heart here? Do you see how he is dignifying women? He believes in the dignity. He is the creator of women and is teaching men how to treat women with dignity. Even in a war bride, a bride taken under difficult circumstances. So after all of that, if the man still wanted her, he was allowed to marry her, have sexual relations with her, but he was to have that within the bounds of marriage. All right. All the neighbors, all the families, the dads, the moms, the uncles and aunts, the people of the city, the elders of the city, the nation, whether they were the tribe of Judah or Benjamin or whoever, they had to recognize this woman as this man's wife. Okay. So now, as such, she has rights. And so if there is going to be a certificate of divorce, and as you recall, Jesus mentioned, because of your stubborn hearts, what did Moses allow certificates of divorce to be placed, set in place? Not because that was necessarily God's ideal. God didn't make man and woman to be to have problems and split up. No, he built into man and woman this unity and oneness that would reflect the nature of God. God is Father, He is Son, and He is Holy Spirit, and there is unity in that. Man and wife and marriage reflects the unity of God. But because of sin and the stubbornness of man and woman's heart, yes, Moses in his time frame allowed for the certificates of divorce to be set into place. And here you're seeing some of the same features. If she doesn't please you, basically, if you just can't make a go of it, yeah, let her go. But you're going to let her go peacefully and in dignity and in honor, for you have humiliated her, and so you do not sell her by any means. I'm sorry I'm spending a lot of time on this particular issue, but I really, really want to get across to us that although the law of God given to the people of Israel, we are not under that law today. We see today, we see the heart of God in it. Okay. And it's God that has not changed. And so we therefore see that God, this unchanging God, has principles that we can look at and say, wow, I see God's heart in that. I too today can apply those principles today. I will demonstrate dignity toward women. I will ascribe high level of dignity toward women, just as God ascribes dignity to women. Okay, so you see God's honor and how He sets in these protection measures so that women within that culture and even in today's culture would not be mistreated and abused. Okay, so let's see again an emphasis on the same point, and I believe I'm going to close with this concept. And that is how essentially, as Israel adheres to the law of God and adheres to His principles that reflect His heart, they would stand out from among all the nations of the world as unique. In Deuteronomy 4:5-8, it says, "Look, I now teach you these decrees and regulations just as the Lord my God commanded me, so that you may obey them in the land you are about to enter and occupy. Obey them completely, and you will display your wisdom and intelligence among the surrounding nations." Let me repeat that. You will display your wisdom and intelligence among the surrounding nations. When they hear all these decrees, they will exclaim, "How wise and prudent are the people of this great nation." Wow, 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 the people are saying. The Egyptians are looking at the Israelites from a distance and saying, "Oh, man, holy Nile," they say. "Holy cat," they say, they swear on their gods. Wow, these people are amazing. How wise they are, how prudent they are. Let me remind you of this, Bathsheba, not Bathsheba, excuse me. I can't think of who's the queen that visited visited Solomon. Okay. The Queen of Sheba. Yeah. Anyway, she visited Solomon and said, "Your kingdom is even greater than what they say. I am blown away," she said, when she saw Solomon in all his splendor and glory. So this is indeed, it happened. It took place. It was fulfilled. The nations declare the Israelites amazing people, smart as all get out, wise as beyond all other nations. Verse 7, "For what great nation has God as a God as near to them as the Lord your God is near to us whenever we call on him? And what great nation has decrees and regulations as righteous and fair as this body of instruction that I am giving you today? So we see other nations, as Israel prospers, as again the tide rises and all the boats rise with the tide, in every aspect, in how they go into warfare, how they run the economy, how they treat one another, how they rest on the Sabbath and forgive debts, how they treat animals, how they treat fruit trees, how they treat excavating ore from the earth, and how they treat other nations, as all the tide rises to the glory of God. The people of Israel are set on high above all other nations, and their the glory of the nation of Israel glorifies Yahweh their God. And the nations say, they fall on their knees, they open their mouths in amazement and say, wow, look at how amazing Yahweh is. So God is glorified when his people are obeying the righteous law of God and following him, and not other nations. When they reject the humanistic systems of that time, the Babylons of that time, the Egypts of that time, they reject those perverted systems and look to Yahweh and say, we by faith accept your word as the best way, and we reject all other nation systems. And then God is glorified. Do you see the principles for today? Do you see them? As you and I are fully, in our full conviction, following by faith the word of God today, right here, right now in our lives, God lifts us up. Okay? You see different people all throughout time are lifted up, and they gain respect and honor within their communities and with among the different people of the nations, maybe even at a global level. Their honor is given unto them. And in turn, their God is given honor, because people see, wow, there is no way Johnny or Harry or Tom or Jill or Jane could have gotten to this point had it not been for supernatural divine intervention. And so people will ultimately glorify the God of heaven, Yahweh, and the person Jesus Christ, our Savior. Let's stop there today, and then we'll complete this particular lesson in a third part.